Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another lecture on work study and methods engineering. We are continuing with module 2, that is method study or operation analysis. And today we are going to discuss last three steps of method study. And they are to define the newly developed or improved method, to install it uh, on the workplace, and to maintain the newly installed method. At the end of this lecture, you should be able to understand different ways and important considerations in defining the new method. Secondly, you should be able to understand the difficulties and cautions involved in installing the new method. And finally, you should be able to understand the importance of following up the new method. So first we will discuss how we can define the improved method or newly developed method and what are the details that should be included once we are defining it. So the standard operating procedure of improved method or a newly developed method should include, first of all, a description of the method. So description includes the steps that are required to perform the method, their sequence, and any other details that might be relevant. So the amount of detail actually required will depend on the nature of the job and volume of production. Secondly, a diagram of the workplace layout should be included because this diagram actually helps the operator uh, in understanding the description that we have included. So that really helps a lot in better understanding the process. And if possible, sketches of the tools, jigs, or fixtures that are being used in that process should be included. And finally, the tools and equipment to be used and general operating conditions should be included where possible. But the details of the description should not be too much. So, for example, Therblick should not be the part of method description. Here is an example of defining a process or a method. So here we are having a flow process chart for the proposed method. So you could see that we have the steps that are required to perform the task, their brief description, as well as some additional details like distance that will be traveled by the material or the part, a summary of different elements of the work. So this is a very simple actually description of the method that we have developed. But the point that I want to emphasize here is that the charts and diagrams that we discussed during our discussion on uh, tools to collect information related to a process can be used actually to define the process as well. So here is the example of a flow process chart, but we could use two-handed chart if it is appropriate. We could use Simo chart, we could use flow diagram as well. So all those charts and diagrams, if relevant, can be used to define a newly developed or an improved method as well. So here we are having a two-handed chart to define the process. So you could see the left-hand description, the right-hand description, and the sequence of steps that are required. But apart from the sequence of steps, we are also having the diagram or sketch of the part that will be made. So it really helps a lot in understanding the description of the steps here. So this diagram will really help better visualize these steps. If possible, actually, we could include the workplace layout as well. So now it depends upon the person who is describing the method actually, how this bar diagram and the workplace layout could be combined actually to show actually the position of different materials and components in the workplace and the nature of assembly that will be finally made. So the point here is that the more details can be included, the better it is. But of course, the process description should not be too complex. It should be easy to understand. Here is another example. So this description of the process or method has different names. So sometimes we call it work instructions, sometimes we call it operation sheet, job description. So it could have different names. So here again, we are having the steps to be performed in sequence, and we have actually included the pictures of the real workplace with respect to the steps that we have mentioned here. And apart from the description and pictures, there is some details of each step that is included, and the nature of each step has also been explained. For example, whether each step relates to safety or a specific step relates to quality or it's a tip. So here again we are having the steps, but pictures really help to understand the process better. Here is another example. So we again are having the steps in sequence and related to each step. The picture of the part or the workplace has also been included. So that is much recommended. So what is the importance of documenting a process or a method? So it is important for communication of the proposed work method to those responsible for its approval. So instead of explaining the new method in terms of words, the charts and diagrams and different formats that we saw can really help better explain it to the management. Communication of the proposed method to those concerned with its installation, for example, instructors and supervisors. So once again, it's much easier to explain the new method or process with the help of charts, figures, and sketches than in terms of statements and words. So the workers and the supervisor who will be actually using that process can better understand it if it is properly uh, explained, if it is properly documented. And this description of the method really is very helpful aid to training or retraining the operators. So as I mentioned in one of the previous examples that in the case of a two-handed chart, we saw the steps that will be required to make that assembly, as well as we had the uh, diagram or the drawing of the final assembly. So it is much easier to actually train the operators on that method if we use these documented procedures. And finally, these uh, documents actually act as official record of the work method. So it can be used by uh, new managers or new supervisors to better understand the past practices using these records, and they can, of course, further improve them if required.